Ron, do you want to start the housekeeping?
Right in your seat.
Welcome and thank you for participating in today's meeting for the South Coast Air Quality Management District. If attending in person, please do not connect to Zoom or teleconference while in the room. To prevent disruptions, please silence all devices. All participants on Zoom, except for board members and South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute. You will not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. After each item, public comment will be taken. If you are participating in person and wish to comment, please use the iPads which are located in the lobby if the meeting is in the auditorium. For meetings in other locations, please complete a blue speaker card and provide the card to a South Coast AQMD employee. Information on how to participate in the meeting in Spanish using a telephone will be provided at the end of these housekeeping remarks. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for all items on the agenda. The amount of time to comment may be shortened to ensure all speakers can be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. If interpretation is needed, more time will be allotted. For questions or issues related to making public comment, please call the public advisor at 909-396-3247. That's 909-396-3247. In terms of decorum, if this meeting is taking place in the auditorium, no food or beverages are allowed in the auditorium. In accordance with state and local public health department guidelines, people may choose to wear a mask based on personal preference while in South Coast AQMD facilities. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being removed from the meeting. Lastly, be aware that this meeting is being recorded. By participating, you agree to authorize recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD. Welcome and thank you for participating in today's meeting for the South Coast Air Quality Management District. If attending in person,
We'll go ahead and call the Stationary Source Committee meeting of April 21st to order and ask for a roll call.
Good morning. Councilmember Cacciato,
Here.
Senator Delgado,
Senator Delgado will not be joining us. She's not feeling well.
okay. Supervisor Mitchell,
Present.
Board Member Padilla Campos,
Present.
Councilmember Salache,
Present.
and Chair McKellen.
Here, thank you.
We have a quorum.
Let's go on to our information item, the status of proposed amended rule 1405. Michael, you're on.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Kraus. I'm an Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in our Planning and Rules Division here at the South Coast AQMD. I'm going to be presenting to you our proposed amendments to our Rule 1405. This is the rule that we've approved back in 1990 in order to regulate ETO emissions from sterilization operations. Next slide, please. Go back one. I'm sorry, Paul. In addition, the state and federal government also regulates these sterilization facilities. They do that in a form of the state regulation called an ATCM, or an air toxic control measure. And then on the federal side, they have what's called the NESHAPs, which is the National Emission Standard for Hazardous Air Pollutants. These facilities recently have been monitored by us, and we've noticed some elevated levels, in which case it pivoted us to re-examine the rule and enhance its provisions. The rule is a control technology-based rule, looking at the best available technologies out there, control technologies, as well as what has been achieved in practice. Next slide, please. For ETO, it is a chemical compound that is both colorless as well as flammable, and in some cases could be explosive. This chemical has the potential to be cancer-causing or carcinogenic. It also is known to have both short-term, acute, or potential long-term or chronic impacts, such as reproductive harm. However, with regards to its effectiveness, it is a very effective sterilizer. And so it's known to have the ability to not only be effective in sterilizing, but also penetrating a package. So it's very convenient as far as a business operations is concerned. And approximately 50% of the medical devices in the US are sterilized with ETO. With medical devices, as they sort of evolve themselves into like things like plastics and what have you, they then tend to be types of items that are very heat sensitive. They could be moisture sensitive. Some of them contain electronics. So it's really important for us to sort of balance out the need to sterilize and have patient safety, as well as ensuring risk is reduced as much as possible to the ambient air and to the neighboring communities. Next slide, please. So how do you calculate risk? So the one very important element of calculating that risk is having the risk value. Now, EPA did propose some risk values back in 2016, and was really surprising because those risk values were 30 to 50 times higher than what had previously been reported by them. These values were challenged, of course, and then finally in 2022, they did confirm those values. We then went out and started doing monitoring of those facilities in our region and investigating some of the levels then ETO. This month, the state's toxicology agency, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, released their risk values. First, they sort of aligned with EPA, but actually when we looked at them, they were 10% more toxic value, risk value. Next slide, please. With regards to the facilities in our region, we have 15 sterilization facilities. They're sort of characterized by large, medium, small, based on their permitted ETO usage. And as you can see here on this graph, 99.9% of those permitted ETO emissions are coming from the 7 large facilities. Those facilities, 4 of those are what's called a contract sterilizer. Basically, they're in the business of sterilizing. So they have various clients that come to them that want their products sterilized. So there could be different types of products, different sizes of the products, different amount of the products. They have to kind of be flexible in their operations when they're trying to satisfy their clients' needs. However, we also have 3 medical manufacturers. They actually do manufacture the medical device themselves and then goes on to sterilize it. We've done some mobile monitoring of all 7 of these facilities. And just a point to highlight something, one of those facilities actually basically accounts for half of what you're seeing when it comes to the permitted usage. Next slide, please. With regard to our mobile monitoring investigation, again, we did an investigation of all those 7 facilities, and we did that through like an initial screening using our mobile monitoring. And then if we got some hits on elevated levels, then we went on to do a more advanced canister sampling and take that back to the lab and do a confirmation on those. And if it was confirmed those were high levels, we then went out and did some fence line monitoring as well as monitoring in the nearby community. These efforts are still ongoing. Next slide, please. Okay, with regards to the findings, back up on there, Paul, thank you. With regard to the findings, we did notice elevated levels in 3 of those facilities. Now, just a point of fact, we did note that when we went away from that facility by a couple hundred feet, those levels did drop. And when we measured in the community, they were basically around background, what we would consider background levels, just so you know. However, all 3 facilities, like all facilities out there, are subject to our hotspots program, which we implement through our Rule 1402. 2 of those facilities through that program went ahead and did plans for risk reduction, what we call the early action reduction plan. So having to take certain actions by certain dates, et cetera. The 3rd facility, however, went ahead and voluntarily shut down temporarily in order to install controls. And once those controls, and I'll show you that data here in a second, but the levels dropped significantly. Next slide, please. So what are we talking about when we're talking about emissions from these facilities? So 2 different types of emissions that would be occurring. One is what we call the stack emissions. So basically all that's occurring in the operations then goes up through a fixed point, in this case, a stack, and we can then regulate and monitor at that point. However, the more challenging one tends to be the fugitive emissions. So this is more open air, and that's more free flowing. And so those can be a little more challenging to control. And again, typically that's through openings such as like doors or loading docks, things like that. Next slide, please. With regard to the process, so ETO is regulated it's approved, it's regulated by the US Food and Drug Administration. They develop protocols. So these are when looking at a particular type of device, how much ETO needs to be used for that sterilization, the timing it takes, as well as for aeration. So there's a set of protocols that are created, and those companies will follow those protocols. When the product comes into the facility, sometimes it'll be preconditioned, which means that it'll have it'll be put in an area where there's a certain temperature or humidity before it's then moved into the sterilization area. Sterilization is the stage by which the ETO then is applied to the packaging, and those areas are also vented then to control equipment. When that process is done, it's then aerated or off-gassed. And again, that process is called aeration, and that is also vented to controls. But then you have another case where the product could move to another area, and we call that post-aeration. And this has the potential also of continuing to off-gas, maybe not at those higher levels, but there is that potential for the fugitive emissions that we're highlighting and concerned about those. Next slide, please. So how are we going to control some of these emissions? So we've got some proposals here on the stack side. We're looking at it. We break this out depending upon the size of the facility. And again, that's based on the amount of permitted ETO usage. So for large facilities, we are proposing a more stringent control efficiency. Our rule already has control efficiency, right? But we're going to be requiring a more stringent one now at what we call the 4.9, so 99.99% of that control efficiency. So what goes in, coming out, and how much you'll be able to reduce down needs to be that level. Or the facility could comply with a concentration limit, so like a cap on those facilities at 0.01. Now, to put things in context, currently the approved requirements, the most stringent requirements are, and they're on the right there, is 99.9. So you can see our proposal is much more stringent, or a cap of 0.2. So again, 20 times more stringent is our proposal. In addition, we're looking at proposing a facility-wide cap, a facility-wide limit based on a rate of pounds per hour. So we think this is a really stringent and an enhanced proposal. For the small and medium facilities, we're also, again, proposing a more stringent requirements there, 99.9 or a 0.01. Now, how do we determine what they're emitting? So we're proposing to have a continuous emissions monitoring on that stack. So we're getting that data minute by minute basis to ensure that they're complying with those limits. Next slide, please. On the fugitive side, we want to require what we call the permanent total enclosure. So you completely enclose that, and you make sure that it complies with an EPA method. What does that method say? That EPA method is saying, basically, you want to make sure that enclosure gets an inward airflow into that enclosure, and you're not having anything escape out of that enclosure. To do that, we're proposing to have a requirement by which the facility needs to continuously monitor what we call the differential pressure to ensure that that is the proper flow, the airflow that's going on. And that way, again, ensuring that those emissions are not removing. We're trying to capture 100% of those in that PTE. So we really think we've got a real good stringent requirement. For large facilities, we're also requiring all of those stages that we mentioned before, the sterilization, the aeration, the post-aeration, all being under this permanent total enclosure. A little different for the mediums and smalls, but the more higher potency area, right? The sterilization and the aeration to ensure those are under there. For medium facilities, also to bring in the storage area. That actually aligns with the proposed EPA NESHAPs. And then for those areas where it's not under the permanent total enclosure, there's if that happens to be there at that facility, we're also then requiring leak detection and repair, both on a daily check as well as a monthly. Next slide. Okay, as I mentioned, that third facility that did the temporary enclosure, we just want to kind of show you some empirical data here by which the concentration levels before those controls were installed. This is the levels there, and then you see the arrow goes down after those controls were installed. The results that we're seeing out there at the site. So we know then that these controls are very effective. Next slide, please. We're proposing a set of timelines for these for the large, medium, and small facilities. We sort of, stacked that accordingly. With regards to the large facilities, we're also requiring record keeping recording their materials that they're sterilizing, as well as labeling. Next slide, please. And we also noticed that there's some facilities out there that are that are not sterilizing. However, they may be receiving products, sterilized products, and are basically being staged or stored, before being sent out to their clients. We're calling these warehouses. FDA does identify certain types of warehouses. So we did get a list from them in our area, and we're looking at those as well. We did monitor 10 of them. There wasn't much. There was one that had some highly elevated levels. It's still under an investigation, but we just feel that we want to do some more research in looking at those warehouses to see their impact, and of course, if there's anything that can be required of them. So we're going to be proposing to require a tracking of the material that goes in there and reporting back to us on that, so we can monitor those and decide any further action. Next slide, please. With regards to complying with the state law, we are also looking at the impacts from implementing the rule under the California Environmental Quality Act, and then do the appropriate CEQA documentation. On the socio side, we're looking, as we always do, at the cost of it, whether it's a one-time cost of the capital cost of the control equipment, as well as the reoccurring costs such as maintenance. Next slide. Okay, so we've got some remaining issues. Of course, the first one we talked about when it comes to the risk values and the stringency of these values. We are looking at those. We do believe that our requirements are either in line or more stringent than the proposals under the NESHAPs. And again, our rule is really striving for the maximum control, the maximum reductions, monitoring, capping emissions. So we really think that it's an effective rule. We do still have our Rule 1402. Again, that's implementing our hotspots program that addresses risk reduction. So all of that will be at play. We do acknowledge that while we think that majority of these facilities will not have, the controls will be enough for them to meet the risk levels, there might be one or two that might need to do something further, such as installing multiple stage controls or possibly changing their processes. Next slide, please. We've also got a request from some of the stakeholders with regards to delaying the rule. I'm sure folks have heard that. The request was delaying the rule till the NESHAPs gets fully implemented. Again, we did take a look at the NESHAPs already, the draft version of that. So we do think we're in line with that. But just to remind you that the NESHAPs also goes through a public process, and there's an uncertain end date to when that gets finalized. So from our perspective, we think these controls are important. We think these controls need to be implemented as soon as possible. And having a further delay will trickle down and have a further delay of these controls. And again, when you do controls, you're also reducing risk. So it's a kind of a win-win. With regards to the NESHAPs, this is a sort of another point. If it ends up being something that turns out to be a little different or additional, we can always go back and modify the rule or implement that requirement. Next slide, please. Okay, we also got a comment with regards to fence line monitoring and the fact that our rule does not propose the fence line monitoring. I just want to make a point here that 2 of the large facilities are currently doing fence line monitoring under our hotspots program. So we do have other avenues by which we could go out and impose fence line monitoring if we feel that it's warranted. But again, going back to what we're doing in the proposed rule, we are proposing monitoring. And it's what I would call the frontline monitoring, right? I mean, we're monitoring right there at the stack, what's coming right out of that facility to ensure that it's meeting that cap. And we're also monitoring, again, the PTE and the effectiveness of that by doing continuous monitoring, minute by minute basis on that differential pressure. So we really think these are very effective, and we are doing that monitoring right there, regardless of, a further distance, away at a fence line. And again, if the state or the federal government comes out and does require that, we can always again implement that requirement. Next slide, please. Okay, with regards to the feasibility of the timelines, large facilities have mentioned to us they're concerned about the timelines, primarily due to possibly like vendor availability or the controls being available due to supply chain issues, et cetera. They also highlighted that some of the standards may not be feasible. Our response to all of this is that, we did look at facilities actually out there installing controls and the times it takes. We also took in their feedback as well in establishing those timelines. But in addition, we looked at all the source test data out there. We know what the facilities are emitting based on the controls that they've installed out there. So we do think that these standards are feasible. However, we're keeping an open mind and we're listening to their concerns and seeing if we can move forward. Okay, next slide, please. And then with regards to next step, we're seeking right now to set in May for a public hearing in June. And with that, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Michael. With the committee's indulgence, I'd like to call for public comment first before we ask for committee comments. So anyone who wishes to provide public comment on this item, please raise your hand.
So the first public commenter is Robina Sewell.
How many do we have?
We have 5.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. My name is Rabina Sewell. I'm the Executive Director of California Safe Schools. We're a children's environmental health and environmental justice coalition. We were created 25 years ago and have worked very, very closely with AQMD through the years. I'm also the co-coordinator of the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network. I think it's important that the committee, that I reiterate too, that the ethylene oxide is the second most toxic chemical that we regulate in the air. It is a known carcinogen and is second only to dioxin. We respectfully request that this rule be delayed and wait for OEHA because unfortunately, there are no clear risk targets. And the rule fails to protect our most vulnerable members of the public, especially children who are living, attending school, or working adjacent to the 7 largest facility sterilizers in our South Coast region that are located in Carson, Vernon, Ontario, and 2 in Temecula and 1 in Sylmar. We need South Coast to support a switch from the use of this highly toxic chemical to safer alternatives. And we need South Coast to adopt much stricter emission limits on sterilizer stacks, require fence line monitoring on all large sterilizers, and adopt emission limits that protect vulnerable communities from hosting the warehouses, and fence line monitoring requirements that verify that these warehouses are safe. Thank you for your time.
So the next commenter is Sam Chung.
Hi, Sam Chung representing California Life Sciences. California Life Sciences represents upwards of 1,300 biotech and medical devices companies throughout the state. We really appreciate the board and the staff's work on this ETO ruling. We respectfully request for additional time for us to evaluate the draft proposal and to provide comments and our thoughts on it. We want to make sure it's done right. And in light of the EPA's recent proposal, we want to make sure we're properly checking what the feds are requiring of us as well as on the state level. So we want to make sure we get this right. So we respectfully request additional time to vet this. Thank you.
Next commenter is Kevin Wagner.
Hi, good morning. This is Kevin Wagner with Sterigenics. Thanks to the time to address the committee this morning, and thank you to the staff for their attentiveness to our concerns regarding the draft rule. I'm representing Sterigenics' 3 Southern California EO sterilization facilities. These facilities are critical to healthcare in Southern California. As staff has noted, ETO is used to sterilize roughly half of all medical devices in Southern California, in most cases because there is no safe and effective alternative. As you can certainly understand, failure to sterilize medical devices can and has resulted in deaths. This rulemaking is proceeding extremely fast, and as such, we are concerned that some of the requirements in the current draft could increase employee exposure to EO inside of the sterilization facilities. Namely, as you heard from staff, the EPA NESHAFT and draft PID or pesticide registration review were just recently released by the US EPA, and we're convinced there could easily be conflicts between EPA and SEA QMD rules. While staff says the district could amend the rule if needed, that can take months, if not years, and could put facilities in violation of either Rule 1405 or the EPA rules. We believe the rule adoption should be deferred for 90 days to accommodate a thorough evaluation of both rules. Also revisions to Rule 1405 to address workability issues, and then finally public review and comment on those revisions. We're also concerned that the 99.99% efficiency or 0.01 ppm outlet standard of performance for emission controls cannot be met by a few of the current technologies. We believe the 99.99% efficiency can be met over the entirety of a large facility, and recommend this instead be the standard used in Rule 1405. Also, the proposed mass emission limit of 0.025 pounds per hour is based on a much smaller facility with lower ETO usage than some Southern California facilities, and is therefore not achievable even with high degree of control at the Illinois facility that it's based off of. We suggest instead an annual limit of 380 pounds per year in lieu of that. Finally, then we concur with the requirement to install SEMS at each facility. But the 2025 compliance date is challenging, with the anticipated demand from facilities across the United States needing these devices, the extremely limited number of suppliers, and the ongoing supply chain delays. We're concerned that it may not be achievable. We therefore request this deadline for SEMS be pushed back by 1 year. And with that, thank you for your time this morning.
Next commenter is Bobby Patrick the sixth.
Hi there. I'm Bobby Patrick, and I'm representing ADVMed, the Advanced Medical Technology Association. I appreciate the opportunity to comment today. I won't go into all of the implications for patients and the supply of medical devices, as that's been touched on by other commenters and has been extensively discussed in our other comments to staff. We do thank staff for their continued engagement with us and our members on this. However, we still have several concerns regarding PAR 1405 around the workability, feasibility, and implementation timeline. We also remain concerned about the potential conflict and confusion with recently released EPA rules, not just the NESHAP, but also with the FIFRA rule, as clear conflicts have begun to emerge already, and some of these cannot be reconciled. Further, returning to amend the rule later may not be workable because of enforcement actions or the cost of potentially undoing work that has already been invested in. This rule has been on an expedited time frame, and we are requesting additional reasonable time to work with staff to improve the rule. This additional time will allow stakeholders to work with staff to ensure the continued responsible use of ETO without jeopardizing patient access to critical medical devices. We request at least 90 days, as this will allow us to respond to the upcoming modified draft from staff, as well as a potential additional one, and allow us to continue making strides to, again, continue to protect the public and ensure the adequate supply of medical devices, not just in California, but around the country. Thank you.
I'm closing the public comment queue at this time.
So the last speaker right now is Felipe Aguirre. So the next commenter is Rick Polito.
Okay, good morning, elected officials, and to all the AQMD members. This is Rick Polito, Commissioner for the City of Carson, 40-year resident, representing 95,000 folks, stakeholders that live within the perimeter of Stringetics. I'm an environmentalist and a mental health advocate, always looking out for our children and our families. Unfortunately, I want to start off with the first thing about what Kevin Wagner was bringing up. He's brought up good points, but he talked about the employee factor, he talked about the long-term effect, but he forgot about the community. You gotta remember, community comes first. Our children in that periphery are gonna be impacted. If God forbid something happened out there, it's close to my house, and we're very concerned. With that said, I would like to say we do agree one time in many years, I can remember with industry, that we do need a delay for up to, till November, I'd say. But during the delay, we want the following things to be done. First of all, point number one, The fence line monitoring, we haven't even spoken about the warehouses. Warehouses need to be reviewed where this stuff is being stored and where it's being utilized to transfer back and forth. We want transportation issues. The toxicity of that is a very, very big and important point. The hazardous toxicity assessment team that is doing the analysis, they need a target date also. We need to know what their plan is and where they're going with it. The other key points that I want to talk about real quickly is that we remember the risk values. It's really simple here, team. We're talking about saving lives, taking care of our families in Carson and throughout the Southern California area, all the other facilities we're worried about. And these cancer-causing factors need to be addressed and need to be looked at, not just a broad stroke. You know, when we talk about the mobile monitoring systems, the hits, we want to know how many hits have happened and what is going on with that. It's very important that we do a baseline database. You know, we talked about health initiatives regarding the health assessments. And if we do the health impact assessments, we'll have a clearer value as time goes by. So it's very important that everybody's on the same page. We thank you all for taking the time and to look at this and review it very closely. All my brothers and sisters here from the EJ are in agreement that we believe, and we wholeheartedly believe, that these hotspots, we could possibly move to other areas that are more vast and not have them done in our residence. I think that's a wrong place to have any type of a facility of this nature. So thank you for your time, and God bless you. And let's work together on getting the
So the next commenter is Jane Williams.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. Hello, I'm Jane Williams. I'm the Executive Director of California Communities Against Toxics, and we've been very engaged in all the rules, the federal rules, the state rules, the local rules, and the whole very long journey on ethylene oxide toxicity. I want to point out to the members of the Stationary Source Committee that this rule was last amended, changed, issued in 1990. In 1990. In 2003, the large epidemiological study on ethylene oxide was released to the public, which found that ethylene oxide was much more toxic than previously known. That was 20 years ago. It took EPA an additional number of years to finally issue a new IRIS assessment in 2016. The state of California just recently, a year ago, decided it should reassess ethylene oxide's toxicity as well. So you can see how long the timelines are for us to get where we are today. And the problem with this rule is, number one, even at the sterilizers, we are not convinced that permanent total enclosure and negative air is going to get us at the risk targets that are the real risk targets, basically based on the new OEHA proposed numbers. Number two, the rule does not include fence line monitoring, so there's no way to verify that your control technology is actually working. And number three, the rule does not include the warehouses. Right now, this rule would allow a couple of 100 pounds of ethylene oxide to be emitted from a sterilizer, but warehouses can emit thousands of pounds of ethylene oxide. So the fact that the warehouses are not included in the rule is a massive oversight and leaves most of the ethylene oxide emissions in the basin completely uncontrolled. And the fourth thing is that fence line monitoring is a control technology. When it was first adopted in the refinery rule back in 2015 by the federal government, the federal EPA found that fence line monitoring was just like bolting on a high efficiency scrubber or a better bag house or any other type of control technology that we require from polluters. It's not a monitoring technology, it's a control technology. So when we say here we are trying to regulate the most toxic compound we currently regulate besides dioxin, and we're not.
So the next speaker is Mark Abramowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mark Abramowitz. I'm with Community Environmental Services. I wanted to agree with the comments of Rabina Sewell and the comments that Jane Williams started making. But I also wanted to raise another issue with the committee. It's common knowledge that we control NOx and VOCs mainly because they convert to ozone in the atmosphere. Particulates can also be formed by transformation in the atmosphere. That's called secondary formation. Some toxics, though, like ETO, can also be formed by conversion in the atmosphere. To those in local communities, they don't care if the air pollution or air toxic that breathing was primary or secondarily formed. They're going to be breathing it the same. So the district really should also be regulating precursors to ETO as a toxic. It's regulated as the and concern is that community exposures from some of the facilities that do emit ethylene are going to have the some of the same problems. Now, I raised this issue early in the workshop process, but for some reason, staff doesn't seem to want to address it. This view, by the way, is something that this method of regulating is how the state also has declared butadiene as an air toxic. And the concern about ETO and its precursors was something that was generated by staff at CARB that worked on the original ETO air toxic that CARB developed a number of years ago. Anyway, I just wanted to express my concern that the rule does not address a potentially large source of exposure to ETO. Thank you very much.
Next commenter is Chris Chavez.
Yes, good morning. Chris Chavez, Deputy Policy Director at Coalition for Clean Air. Just very briefly, want to echo the comments of Jade Williams, Rabina Sewell, Mark Abramowitz. This is certainly an important issue to discuss given the implications for public health, given the implications also for smog formation. So I know this particular rule is may still have some work ahead of it. However, certainly want to urge the district and its staff to continue working in developing a strong rule that will protect community health and help improve air quality in what is yet again America's smoggiest air basin. Just wanted to share those comments, share those thoughts, and look forward to continue engaging in this process. Thank you.
Next commenter is Adrian Martinez.
Good morning, Chair Mitchell and members of the committee. My name is Adrian Martinez, and I'm here on behalf of Earth Justice. I too, like Mr. Chavez, wanted to reiterate and plus one the points made by Ms. Sewell, Ms. Williams, and Mr. Abramowitz. We appreciate the presentation from staff. It was very informative, and we appreciate the time that staff are taking to address this important issue. We do, recommend kind of, in this instance, measuring twice and cutting once, especially since there's some forthcoming guidance that will help navigate how we deal with this serious issue. So we recommend the recommendations from Ms. Sewell, Ms. Williams, Mr. Williams, Mr. Chavez, and Mr. Abramowitz. Thank you.
And the last commenter, because the chair closed the public comment period for folks that were signing up is Felipe Aguirre.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Felipe Aguirre. I'm the director of Comité Pro Uno here in the city of Maywood, California. We're located a few feet from the Sterigenics facility in Vernon, and that facility is located like 2 blocks from Maywood Elementary School here in the city of Maywood, where we have known many of the teachers there have attained cancer recently in the last few years. We're really preoccupied about the way this rule is being developed fairly quickly. And we really want this rule to be done in a way that is really protective of the health of the people that are living there, the students. I don't really think that the negative air enclosures really work. The facility in Sterigenics in Ontario already has a negative enclosure. And I don't really think that the numbers in terms of the emissions have changed a lot. And we really ask you to take a pause on this rule until we get the complete rules from OIHA, which are going to be coming out in November of this year. And we join with our other colleagues, Jane Williams, Rick Pulido, Chris Chavez, and Mark Abramowitz, ask you, and Robina, to ask you to please pull off this rule until we study the effects of this chemical clearly and on the human bodies, and really try to change the way that this chemical is being utilized, to not utilize it, not to try to enclose it, because your rule only covers the actual facilities. You don't cover the warehouses. The facilities here in Vernon, I think, is both storage, warehouse, and a production plant. So please put this rule on hold until we're able to develop better alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of your comments. Mike, do I understand correctly in your presentation that when you monitor the facility, it dropped off to ambient rather rapidly?
That's correct.
So does that mean the real exposure is to the employees inside the facility?
So
yeah.
So what we did was we have ambient monitors at 3 of the facilities, and we did find offsite levels that were elevated for 3 of those facilities. Now, one of the facilities immediately put on controls. They shut their facility down. And so when they shut the facility down, upgraded their existing pollution controls, did the permanent toll enclosure, the offsite ambient levels of ethylene oxide are near background levels or at background levels. So we know that what we're proposing is, it really is the gold standard when we're talking about fugitive emissions. And what we're requiring for the permanent toll enclosure, all of that airflow is vented to the pollution controls. So it's a technology-based rule. It's, addressing the ethylene oxide. We had in mind the EPA number. We had in mind that OEHA was going to come somewhere around that number. So the rule is a very strong rule to address those high ethylene oxide emissions.
My understanding from the industry is that the cap on the PTE, they can meet that. It's the concern about the control systems, the inside, that also have to meet certain requirements that is technology driven, and that technology may not be available right now.
So the emissions within the building and any monitoring within the building, that is in the purview of OSHA. And so we would defer to OSHA or with EPA with any of the indoor air quality.
So there's nothing on
right.
control.
Our rule doesn't have requirements for indoor air quality.
No control systems.
Right. It's stack emissions, permanent toll enclosure to ensure that all the emissions are being captured, controlled. So we're minimizing any offsite emissions, any ambient emissions that are emanating from the facility.
Do you know what the OSHA requirements are?
I don't know specifically what the OSHA requirements are, but I don't know, Sarah, if you want to comment. I think EPA has some revisions on some additional requirements for indoor air quality, but that again, we leave to those agencies to address that issue.
Okay. I'll go to the rest of the committee for comments. I have 2 hands raised on TV land. Supervisor Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. 2 questions for me. First of all, the staff, why no fence line monitoring? Why was that not included in your proposal?
So what we did was there's a couple reasons. So the first and foremost in the rules, we want to focus on getting the reductions and making sure the facilities install the controls. But what we did was when we knew about the revision to EPA's value, and it was at the urgence of the community that was saying, even though EPA is saying we don't have an issue, that California, they didn't identify any of our sterilization facilities as being a problem. We wanted to do our due diligence. So we did mobile monitoring around all the large sterilization facilities. And we identified 3 facilities with elevated levels that took us to the point where we started to do ambient monitoring around those facilities. So there's a 2-prong approach here. The first prong is in the 1405 proposed amended rule, but we also have a second prong, which is our AB 2588 hotspots, which is in our rule 1402. So both of the Sterigenics facilities in Ontario and Vernon, they have what's called an early action reduction plan. And in that early reduction plan, they are required to also conduct monitoring. So we're getting the monitoring through a different avenue. It's not through 1405, it's through the 2588 process. We are considering a companion rule to our monitoring rule for metal particulate toxic air contaminants to expand the applicability for gaseous toxic air contaminants that could bring a facility in to also have to do monitoring. So there's other ways to do monitoring that are not in this rule. We really want to get the controls for all the facilities, get control of the ethylene oxide emissions. And so that's the focus of 1405.
So pardon my naivete, but my assumption is that the mobile monitoring is equivalent to kind of a point in time monitor, as opposed to fence line, which is continuous.
Right.
Is that accurate or no?
That is, it's accurate. In fact, the mobile monitoring, really, we use it just as a screening tool. It doesn't actually measure ethylene oxide, but gives us a signal that says there could be a problem. So then we take the next step to do a canister sample. And then if we see elevated levels there, then we do the next step of the ambient monitor, takes a 24-hour sample. We do it on specific days. And so that's the type of monitoring that is currently going on at Parter, Sterigenics, Vernon. There's 2 facilities in Vernon, and then Sterigenics in Ontario. So that monitoring is ongoing. The 2 Sterigenics facilities have in their early action reduction plan to continue to do the ambient monitoring along with our work doing the ambient monitoring.
So, Mr. Chair, my last question has to do with the timeline. As I watched the presentation, my initial thought was, why not a more aggressive timeline? When I listened to public member, Ms. Williams, outline the years it has taken to draw attention to this chemical, again, in my mind, why not a more aggressive timeline? I was not surprised to hear the industry say, give us more time. I understand that. But I was surprised by the advocacy community asking for more time. My assumption, I'm sort of reading between the lines here, so if I'm off base, someone please feel free to tell me. My assumption is that the advocacy community is concerned that if we accept this rule, EPA and all the other investigatory kind of entities come out with new regulations. There's a concern that we then won't adjust or we won't do more. Is that a fair assumption? Because I'm just struck by the residents and the advocacy community saying to pause on this rulemaking.
you want me to respond?
Yeah.
Okay,
Please.
so when it comes to air toxics, there's 3 layers. So there's at the federal level, they have the national emission, the NESHAP for the hazardous air pollutants. The state has, it's called an air toxics control measure, so ATCM, and then ours. It is not uncommon for us to come out first. It is not uncommon for us to be more stringent. We are required to be equally as stringent as the state and EPA when it comes to these regulations. So if EPA were to come out with something that was more stringent, we would then we would be required to modify our rule. But we have reviewed the draft. It's like our proposed rule on many fronts is more stringent. They do not have a facility-wide emission level that they have to meet. They don't have the same monitoring that's in for the provisions for the permanent total enclosure. They have an off-ramp for the in-stack monitoring for the SIMs. And their rule, their regulation is seeking 100 in a million. Our rule is very much technology forcing, pushing to try to achieve the 25 in a million. And if they don't, we have the second prong of AB 2588, where we can require the additional requirements for a facility to ensure that they'll meet the 25 in a million. And that's what the board has adopted for Rule 1402 for that risk level for facility wide.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, staff.
Thank you. Councilmember Salache.
Thank you, Chairman. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to all the public comment. I know that as one of the newest members of this committee, I do appreciate the feedback that that was provided today, just to more understand from the community's perspective, from industry perspective, their perspective on this. So this is really helpful. I do have a couple of questions. So the first one I have is a kind of broader, picture question. Well, what are the pros and cons of waiting for state and federal rule changes? If staff could just answer that first.
Sure. So I really see it as primarily a pro for us to move forward for community health protection. We identified an issue and we're trying to address that issue. If we wait for EPA to promulgate the revisions to the NESHAP and to allow folks to implement that, we're looking at 2.5, probably 3 years for the controls. We already know the types of controls that are needed. And so it's our understanding, it's like we want these reductions. We're concerned about the levels that we saw. And so once we get this, if we can get it approved, then we have enforceable conditions for all the facilities, large and the medium-sized sterilization facilities.
Got it. Thank you. As a quick follow-up to that response too, once we get to a point where we do, take action on this item, what are can the rule be amended to address potential state and federal changes that happen post taking action on this item? Okay.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask that as a follow-up. And then, in the district that I represent, obviously 2 facilities that come to mind here are Vernon and Carson. Can you tell me, and the cities of Vernon and Carson, can you tell me more about the facility in Vernon findings and what the district actions have been?
Sure. So there's 2 facilities in Vernon that are right next to each other. So we refer to it as generally one facility. And so we started when we did the mobile monitoring, we saw very elevated levels around the Vernon facilities. And what we saw for that facility was we saw many openings in the building and the need for there was a substantial amount of fugitive emissions that were escaping from the building. So we quickly worked with the facility. We designated them under our Rule 1402 process as a potentially high-risk level facility, worked with the facility to establish a timeline to install additional point source controls, and then for them to build the permanent total enclosure. So the numbers have come down substantially, but after they complete the permanent total enclosure, we think they're going to be probably very close to background levels or at background. So that's generally, where we are with the Vernon facility. So we're on a very good path with them. They're also conducting the ambient monitoring alongside with us. So, yep.
Thank you, thank you. And the last question I have, obviously, we're dealing with this issue on hand based on some, recent updates that have happened. I wanted to ask, and I'm happy, by the way, that we're not taking action on this today because I don't think any of us are ready, from the governing, from a committee members to the EJ community to industry. I think there's definitely more conversation. I do want to appreciate staff reaching out to the different communities because they both acknowledge that your engagement has been very helpful. So I do want to say thank you on behalf of this committee because that helps our work as a committee members and governing board members. Are there any things that can possibly happen between now and us taking some sort of formal action to continue protecting the community? Is there anything that staff sees that we can do between now and then? Because I understand the timelines, are still not ironed out. I think Supervisor Mitchell mentioned just the different angles of timeline, but I just wanted to ask from the angle of as we get to those dates of approval and then finally approving the final timelines, are there any actions that we as AQMD could do just to continue protecting our community? Thank you.
So with the parallel process with our Rule 1402 for the hotspots, bringing those facilities into that program, they're already required to implement additional measures that are enforceable. But we really need this rule because this is 3 of the 7 large sterilization facilities. And then we have the 7 other facilities. We know fugitive emissions for ethylene oxide are an issue. We really want to level the playing field, ensure that we get the reductions. And this is really about localized community impacts. And so we feel the urgency for this rule.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. That concludes my questions. Again, I look forward to engaging staff and the different communities and industry to further understand and see how we're going to tackle this issue. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Vice Chair Cacciati.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, great presentation. If you can go to the slide, Paul, about the ETO investigation findings, just the 3 maps. Just want to get a clarification on those maps. Kind of follows Councilmember Salachi's questions about the areas coming up. Right there. So Mike, I'm just on those 3 maps, say the top one, Vernon, can you enlarge it a little bit? Paul, is it able to be enlarged a little bit, the Vernon one? If not, that's okay. If you can explain that map to me, Mike, this is the blue outline, is that the facility? I'm trying to understand what the
So the dot is generally where the facility is, and then the light blue and the dark blue, that is where we conducted the mobile monitoring. So what we did is we have a van and it has a monitor, and we're looking to see if we see any signals that would be an indication of possibly ethylene oxide, and they drive around the facility, around the perimeter, going into the community to see if there's any issues. And so what we found in the mobile monitoring was those darker blue dots, and those darker blue dots were showing the possible signal for ethylene oxide. So then we took the next step of the canister sample. And then when the canister sample showed elevated levels, then we did we placed ambient monitors.
So the one in Vernon, if I look kind of south going down, are those all homes?
That's correct. And so what we saw was a very quick drop off. That's where Mike had highlighted. We see with the ethylene oxide, a very quick drop off on the concentrations. And so when we put monitors and canister samples in the community at the school, we saw it was just background levels. We do have a monitor that's between the facility and the school. There's a school to the right lower corner, and there's a monitor. It's on a street called Fruitland, and the monitor is at background levels, and that's closer to the facility than the school.
So with Carson too, it looks like it's the yellow dot is the facility, is it monitoring, but north and kind of west of there is a large residential population.
That's correct. So with Carson, it did have the community that was closer. We put a monitor at the closest community area to the facility. and we had an ambient monitor. We still have an ambient monitor at the school. And then there was a park you can kind of see a little bit to the north. We had an ambient monitor there, and we saw background levels at those locations.
And the one on Ontario looks like it's maybe near a freeway and also in an industrial area, kind of.
Right. Yeah, there weren't any residential areas that were near it. Again, quick drop off, elevated levels near the facility. The Ontario facility is by far the largest user of ethylene oxide of the three facilities that you're looking at here.
Is that the one you said comprises like 50% of all the?
That's correct.
Okay. Second question, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So there was, I think one of the speakers said there's no way to, and I quoted, no way to verify our AQMD's other monitoring efforts is actually working unless you do fence line monitoring. Is that accurate or statement or no?
So I would say no, because we have the ambient monitors, and then so we have other ways to measure the efficacy of other controls at the facility. And so that's what Mike had highlighted. So once we know that the facility has these other controls in place, and we're seeing the ambient levels being at background, then we can look to ensure that the controls that they have, they're operating properly. And so the primary control for the stack, we have a SIMS, continuous emissions monitor in stack that will measure the ethylene oxide. And then for the openings of the total enclosure, we're measuring any kind of pressure drop. So we know that they're constantly getting the inward face velocity that's required under that EPA method 204 for permanent total enclosure. So there's other ways. It's like once we know that it's like you get it set for that certain level, and then we just make sure that everything's continuing to be set at that same level. And so we monitor the stack and the permanent total enclosure. And
again, how does somebody here monitor it? How do we actually monitor it?
For the SIMS?
Yeah.
It's a continuous, it collects the.
And then it's one of our staff member goes out and monitors every day.
Yeah,
or-
and they provide the data to us, and or we
Okay.
look at the data, right?
Who provides the data to us?
The facility, because so we use continuous emissions monitors for other rules for reclaim facilities,
Right.
NOx. So there is a technology that you can use also for ethylene oxide, and that's the similar type of technology for the in-stack monitor.
And just that, I hope everybody's honest, but like the diesel, where they manipulated the devices, there's no way to manipulate these devices to give us incorrect information.
There's protocols and all kinds of requirements for them to ensure that they're working properly. And then, we can always source test and test. And we can always do periodic canister samples, go back there and do ambient monitor to verify.
So Councilmember Salachi said, during this meantime, which may be months if we put it off for a while, we can really help the community. We're going out with canisters, we're monitoring a little more effectively.
Mhm.
Finally, Larry, one more. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I forget who was talking about, maybe it was Mark. Ethylene oxide secondarily formed. This was a concern, and I've heard this talked about a little bit before. We know how, like ozone, so it's the nitric oxide, volatile organic compounds, photochemical reaction to the sun, ozone.
Mhm.
How, this is concerning. How is this secondarily formed? This is a concern. How has that happened?
I don't know, and also I'll defer to someone behind me to answer that. But I can say that we have all been worried about the background levels of ethylene oxide with the proposed revision for OWIHA with the cancer value. So it's like even background levels could be concerning. So we have been talking to the California Air Resources Board, and they're going back to look at the speciation of the vehicle emissions to see if there's anything that is associated with ethylene oxide. So there is, we're all working together, collaborating to see and better understand the sources of background levels of ethylene oxide. So secondary formation, Sarah.
Yeah, so it's just a really good question. It's something that I think there needs to be a lot more work on. And we've definitely had, as Susan mentioned, conversations with California Air Resources Board about this because in light of the new proposed risk numbers from OWIHA, this is really concerning. It shows that background levels in general would be higher than our risk thresholds. And so figuring out, well, where's all that coming from? It's not coming from these sterilizers. It doesn't appear to be, because we see that we have rapid drop off from our own monitoring from the facility border to the community. It's not impacting that. So where is this background coming from? There can be secondary formation from different chemicals like ethylene, for example, degradation of that, but it's still something that needs to be investigated. And it's something that we will continue to work with CARB and others on.
Thank you, Larry.
Board Member Padilla-Campos.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions too, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I was going to ask about how many times the mobile samples were done, but what I understand, you did it once, that triggered the canister study, right? That kind of led to everything else. So my question was on a slide, you were talking about the different phases. And so during the post aeration phase, has the product been moved to a new location after the aeration stage, or is it in the same place? So from aeration to post aeration, is that a new location where it's at?
Yeah, I think it just depends on how the facility is, how they have their product flow, but and the post aeration could be in a separate area where the aeration room is. But what the rule is going to require is that the aeration room is already required to be vented to pollution controls, but the post aeration, all of that is now has to be in the permanent total enclosure, all vented to pollution controls. The pollution controls are upgraded from the current rule 1405.
So that will be new, sort of.
That is correct.
Okay. And do we know how long the off gas, how long that takes, the off gas of these products?
No, we don't. And I think there were questions, well, what about the warehouses? And so the rule is collecting additional information on the warehouses. We feel the urgency to move forward for the large sterilization and the medium sterilization facilities. We have enough information about what needs to be done. So we will likely be coming back to talk about warehouses in a separate rule.
Great,
for ethylene
you
oxide.
answered another question that I had. Okay, thank you. So you can potentially come back to us when we have more information on warehouses, because I heard that as a comment and concern from one of the public speakers today. You also had a slide on, I guess, a facility that maybe did implement some of the one that had the reduction in emissions. So this is a facility that took effect or implemented some of these, PT. So basically, this shows that it can work. It can have a significant reduction in exposure. So I think this is a great slide. I just want to mention that to really understand that what we're talking about here can be effective. And I mean, are we adopting a stricter health guidelines than EPA adopted in 2016? Are we doing stricter than others, stricter guidelines than any others are doing?
Yeah, so two separate things. One would be establishing what the risk value is, the cancer risk value. The South Coast AQMD doesn't do that. We rely on OEHA, the Office of Environmental Human Health Hazard Assessment, to do that. But EPA, that reference in terms of starting in 2016, and there were issues with that, and then the recent revision it's called IRIS for their risk value. That's separate. So yes, they establish those values. We follow OEHA. OEHA has a draft value. We already knew what the EPA was looking like. We now know the draft OEHA. So our rule, without having the value in front of us at the time when the rule was started, we designed it to be what we would refer to as a technology-based rule, looking at all the available technologies to get us to the maximum reductions. And so now, knowing the value, we know we need everything that's in the rule to minimize the risk, to get us as close or below 25 in a million. So that's what we're striving for.
Right. Thank you. I'm also kind of surprised to hear from the community the extension requirement. You mentioned a potential lag time of 2 years. I don't think we can wait 2 years. I think it's time that we implement this now, especially if we know we can get some serious reductions. I know we're not gonna, well, I don't know, are we gonna vote on this? But
No, yeah,
No,
today is
um,
just a informational item for the stationary source, and then it'll come to the full board. This is scheduled for, I believe, June.
June.
Yeah, June board meeting. If I could encourage the committee that we continue on the path that we're on, and then we take it to the full board and let the full board at that time decide on, how we want to move. But from staff's perspective, for the community, we feel the urgency for this rule.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, staff, for all of your hard work on this. It appears to me that the early action plans that have been in place are working. And regardless, the putting this thing off for NESHAP, I think is wrong. However, I believe there are significant issues that have been brought up both by the industry and by the communities, which need to be addressed. Therefore, what I'm proposing is that we put this off for 90 days and that you return to this committee in 60 days with an update. Is there any objection from the committee?
So we wouldn't vote,
Pardon?
so we would not vote in June with the full committee? I mean,
Yeah, we come back to this committee to address, in those 60 days, to address the issues brought up by both the industry and by the environmental community, who are both asking for a delay. And not a 2-year delay, we're talking about a 90-day delay. And it appears that for the large facilities, their early action plan seems to be working. And I think we need to iron out some of these issues before it comes back before the board. There are significant issues, both industry and environmental justice communities, that need to be addressed.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Salache.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the recommendation. I think both sides of the aisle want time to us to make sure we do our due diligence as a agency. So I think that they continue. Our staff keeps working with industry and our community to address all the concerns. I think it's good, and I definitely wanted to come back to committee so we could keep addressing some of these concerns. But again, I want to reiterate my point that if anything we could do in the meantime to continue protecting our community, I want to make sure that we continue doing those efforts. Thank you.
Can I hear from Supervisor Mitchell? What are your thoughts?
I was going to ask the staff their perspective on the delay. I wasn't expecting that suggestion. So if staff wouldn't mind weighing in, giving me their perspective.
Yeah, definitely not in favor of a delay, but possibly maybe we can come back to stationary source next month and kind of let you know where we are with the rule and stay on the course for June and work with all the stakeholders to try to continue to address their issues. So we do, again, feel the urgency. This was something that was brought forward to the community. The draft revision for the OEHA value, we had that in our mind at the onset of the rule development, recognizing that we needed to go very stringent in the requirements to ensure community health protection. These levels, if there are thousands in a million, very significant health risks that we would see. And so we really want to ensure that we're moving forward with a rule that can move forward very quickly.
But everybody that talked to us today asked for a delay. And I know industry wants a delay. the environmental community wants a delay to address those issues that each one has brought up. So I think it's appropriate that we go forward with my suggestion. Go ahead, Supervisor Mitchell.
I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, I do have concerns for the length of the delay you're suggesting. I appreciate staff responding to my question about, why the community and the environmental community would ask for such a delay. And I have my assumptions about why they did based on, I think, perhaps past practices of AQMD board. And so I do have a concern about the length of the delay you're suggesting. Would you be open to following the staff suggestion of bringing it back to us next month and giving us an update on where they are? That will also allow me, Mr. Chair, to connect with some of the environmental groups, to perhaps have an offline conversation, to allow me to push back a little bit about why they were suggesting a delay. I'm concerned about the environmental groups' request for a delay. It doesn't quite make sense to me. So I would like to follow up on that. So if would be okay with following the staff's reco of at least just bringing it back to this committee next month.
Mr. Chair, is that, it's going? Go ahead.
No, I thought you were going to answer her, but you can go ahead, Mr.
Mr. Chair, I would go along with the supervisor, and the way you've characterized it with the environmental groups industry, I agree 100%. I think with staff, instead of 2 months, 1 month to bring it back and then let's assess it. And I'm kind of with you, Larry. I understand there's a lot of research and back and forth, so I'm willing to bend, but I think if we bring it back next month, we have another chance to reassess it rather than put it off 2 months. And ultimately, maybe the whole board will say in June, put it off 90 days or 6 months, whatever.
So you're proposing that we bring it back to the committee in
May,
but not delay the set hearing?
Susan, would that be your recommendation?
Yes.
And then a lot of things can change between then and now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I really want if we do that between now and the next meeting, seriously address those issues that have been brought up. And I want you to address each one of them when you bring it back to this committee, both the industry and the community concerns, each item. Okay?
Will do.
Is that satisfactory with the committee?
Yes.
I appreciate you accepting that because I would really like to see us to stay the course. So thank you for that.
Okay.
I would support that.
Very good. Thank you very much, staff, for your participation and your presentation. Let's go on to, we have 3 written reports. Is there any need to address any of those? Would the committee wish to have those presented or just receive them?
Whatever you prefer, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well then we'll go on to other business, and I do have one thing I'd like to ask, and that's the status report on the study requested by the board concerning the notification requirements of 1148.2.
So we did commit to coming back to the Stationary Resource Committee. So we're thinking if we can come back in June to provide that update to the Stationary Resource on the 1148.2 notification, if that would be okay, Chair.
You have nothing to say of where it's at right now?
The staff still, they're working on it. It's like there's been so many other things, but yes, we will if we can come back in June to provide that update.
How about May?
Yep.
Very good, thank you.
Poor Mike Krause.
I know everyone's busy, but I think it's important to see where we're at. Thank you. With that, we'll go on to public comment for items not on the agenda, general public comment.
So we have one hand raised, which is from Mark Abramowitz.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Last time your last meeting, there was discussion of Rule 1135 relating to the diesels on Catalina Island. And if you recall, I was very effusive in my compliments on what a great job staff was doing on it. And the rule was scheduled to be coming before the full board very shortly. Subsequent to your meeting, apparently, the rule was delayed as a result of a study which came out from Southern California Edison, where Edison claimed that the district's proposals were infeasible. And they also, in their analysis, actually didn't look at the items that the scenario that staff looked at. It's been clear that Edison has not liked the idea of moving over to zero emission technologies. And their arguments in terms of why were not accepted by the Public Utilities Commission nor the Public Advocate's Office in the PUC. I'm concerned that that staff has removed that from the board's calendar for consideration. It was supposed to come up at this next meeting, and it's not happening. And I know that that Councilman Rodriguez, for example, wanted to put some guardrails on this after board member Padillo Campos had pressed for this new analysis. And so I would urge the committee to press staff to put this the rule back on track so that we can get those diesel emissions reduced and on Catalina Island, which of course is upwind from all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for your comments. Next, Rick Polito.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words here. I'm very impressed with this AQMD. It's a new era. It's a new time. And what I'm hearing today is what I've always aspired to hear for the last 10 years. As an environmentalist, we've always had to push and pull and, have to argue our points so vividly to get things done. But I feel you, Mr. Chair, and I feel the council members, and especially our honorable supervisor, Mitchell, who said it very vividly today that, we want to move forward. We want to keep streamlining everything we can. We want to be very innovative in all of our projects and our rule changes. We do want to be, cognizant that, we have to make sure things are done properly and the due diligence that the councilman brought up, as well as just the fact of the matter that the vice chair and yourself are alluding to. It is time, and it's very timely. I have to say this with strong emphasis. We, the people, are heard. The environmentalists, our voices we come and go sometimes when we get frustrated, but the strong veterans, the ones that stick around, and the ones that are like yourselves, here for the community, here for our neighborhoods, here for our children, here working hard, and now hearing the staff finally understanding after years, and I'd say last century, even when I first was a young man, hearing about AQMD, I just thought it was its own little management district and, out there like the rest in the universe. But guess what? We are now, the tide is changing. The time has come. The grassroots voices are being heard. I'm just ecstatic that what I've heard today, and I will already tell you out front, I was hoping you guys could vote on this today if you wanted to. I was ready myself, but I went along with my colleagues. I was waiting for the right timing to give you enough time to really review everything. But with that said, I want to end with just letting you know, we're here to help you. We're your voice, we're your backbone, we're the grassroots. When we share our thoughts and we measure them and we discuss them, we go into length too. We're now using more scientific approaches. We're doing our own fence monitoring over here in Wilmington. My CFOSIS, Coalition for a Safe Environment, Jesse Marcus and myself and our team, we have built now a network so that, one, we are now able to justify our evidence-based findings. Our fact finding on fence line monitoring is finally taking heed throughout the whole Southern California area. We've been talking about it for 10, 15 years. and the HIA's health impact assessments. Long overdue for every project, for our children, for our families. We say thank you, AQMD. Thank you to this new board. And we're looking forward to working with you and making things happen for our communities and our residents. Take care. Have a great weekend. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Polito. With that, no more public comment. We will adjourn. Our next meeting will be Friday, May the 19th. Same place. Thank you very much.